Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Well podcast. As of the time of this recording, we are 6 days removed from the Coldcard fiasco. And my guest today is a dear friend of mine, none other than the Bitcoin historian. And in today's episode, we are not only going to dive into what has been going on in the last week with this Coldcard fiasco, but a look back at history. As Mark Twain once said, history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I do believe that there are lessons in Bitcoin's history that we could have learned and we should have paid closer attention to, and that we should be paying attention to so that in the future we can prevent anything close to this calamity happening again. Pete, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Welcome to the Bitcoin Well podcast.
Q, it's great to be here. Yeah, we're great at losing Bitcoin, right? Great at mining it. We're great at talking about it, but we're just Olympic at losing Bitcoin, unfortunately. So that might be the headline.
I honestly, man, the irony of all of this is I feel like the last time that you and I got to sit down and actually do a podcast together, we were in the throes of yet another type of Bitcoin custodial calamity. I believe it was during the Terra Luna fiasco in the summer of 22, so just 4 years ago. And that was sandwiched between FTX, Celsius, BlockFi. We've been here, but we've never exactly been here. Give me a little bit of a recap of like what, when you heard the news, first went through your head and what you've kind of been picking up bits and pieces as things have become more and more public.
Well, first response, this was unthinkable. I don't think that if you had asked anybody in the entirety of the industry, a week before this happened, I said this before, and I'll say it again. The day before this happened, Coldcard was considered sort of the gold standard of custody companies in the industry. And then afterwards, obviously, now we know that perception was perhaps inaccurate. But I think this changes everything. I think that it is a massive gaping shotgun hole through a lot of our core ideologies. I think there's going to be a lot of soul searching. And I think that the thing that's given me pause is really the question of, I think there's been a lot of folks in the Bitcoin movement who prioritize self-custody, and it is a great aspect of the system. But I think we have to be a little bit more honest about how well that scales and whether or not some people will be capable of doing it under the current conditions that are required. I will say that if there was anything that saved me from some incidents with the Coldcard, it wasn't because I didn't know the company or know the people. In both cases, I did. It's that I'm not a really strong technical user of Bitcoin. People who follow my podcast, they know that I'm pretty honest about that. I use a collaborative multi-sig where, at the end of the day, if something's wrong, I can call somebody on the phone. And that's what I need to feel comfortable with Bitcoin. And I think that there's going to be a broad conversation, I think, about how we onboard people to the Bitcoin ecosystem, because clearly in this case, the unfortunate reality is a lot of people followed all the rules. They listened to all the best practices and they did all the right things. And I think they came to face with a black swan event that theoretically, we knew this was possible. But to your point about the history, I think there's maybe only one scenario in the Bitcoin history that I think is even somewhat comparable. Obviously there have been losses before, but in terms of this scale, for users who are, again, trying to custody Bitcoin themselves and not rely on a custodian, you're in rarefied air where this is likely one of the worst incidents.
Yeah, I mean, look, the mantra, the belief was that not your keys, not your coin, meant that if you had your Bitcoin in self-custody, you are as safe as could be. Now, mind you, there has always been the joke of losing your keys in a boating accident, and there was always user error that was to be feared with self-custody, which is why, I have friends who, similar to you, they feel more comfortable using some form of a collaborative custody, because at the end of the day, you need to do what makes you feel safe when you go to bed at night. And I do want to just point out to everyone who is watching or listening right now, we at Bitcoin Well, that is our number one priority with all of our clients and customers. If you are concerned about what's happening, if you want to go over what options there are as far as self-custody, please feel free to reach out to us. Hop on over to bitcoinwell.com/infinite and set a time with one of our Bitcoin advisors, and we will walk you through what makes the most sense for you as an individual. Because what works for me, what works for Pete, may not actually work for you. But I do want to kind of double click on something that you said, because in prepping for this, I did kind of dig into the history of all of these failures. I mentioned a couple, but what failure sticks out to you in the past that feels most similar to what we're seeing go on right now?
Yeah, you got to go all the way back to 2012, 2013. There was a great hope at the time for a little website called brainwallet.com. So I don't know if people have ever heard the story. In fact, I've just sort of remembered it in kind of you're jogging my memory. But there was a time before mnemonic seed words, right? So before you had the 12 to 24 words that, a device like a Coldcard would generate for you, Bitcoins were stored, Bitcoin private keys were longer strings of numbers and letters that were preserved in different ways, and that were not just a static set of mnemonic words. In fact, the way that the BIP39 implementation works is it takes those sets of words and it derives numbers from them, and it reconstructs, what is actually your private key. And there was a hope that, and this was sort of in the brain wallet concept, is that you could sort of store Bitcoin in your head, right? That you would never really have to have a hardware wallet, never have to have a software wallet, that like your mind could control your own money. And there was a website called brainwallet.com. It became pretty popular. Obviously, people were looking for ways to introduce Bitcoin to the world, and it was such a fascinating concept, right? It's like, well, your memory can be your money, right? It's just like a mind-bending thing. And I'm remiss that I wish I brushed up on it before the conversation, but I can't remember the exact failure. But in classic Bitcoin fashion, somehow this website got compromised. And it turned out the users who were generating their brain wallet with the website, the website was actually arranging and giving your words to set up your wallet, became compromised. And lo and behold, there was a attacker who, in a very similar fashion to Coldcard, community swept through it and stole a lot of the coins. So yeah, this would be from an era where obviously massive coin losses were pretty regular. I mean, back in 2012, there was also an incident where there was basically an actual Ponzi scheme. It was called the Shavers Loan and Trust, or something loan, Bitcoin Savings and Trust, right? They basically got 8% of the Bitcoin supply, and the reason everyone gave them that Bitcoin is they offered 8% daily returns. Maybe you could argue a bit of the STRC of its day, except it was backed by a single Texas man who was just day trading the Bitcoin on the back end and trying to make up the money. And so, but the Brain Wallet one is unique, right? Because I think folks were trying to take self-custody. After that, you had the Mt. Gox hack. I remember writing the headline for CoinDesk, which I'll always remember. Mt. Gox exchange says 350,000 Bitcoin lost. That was a big deal. But yeah, I think most of the issues have happened with custodians. There are really very few instances of there being systemic hardware failures, right? So it was always possible. You could think of James Howells, the man who threw his laptop into the landfill. I mean, he was self-custodying in a way, right? His coins were on his laptop, which ended up in the landfill. So maybe a victim of self-custody in a way, though I probably wouldn't have made that connection before this week. There are always issues of end user loss. But this is kind of unique for just, and I think you'd have to go back to the Brain Wallet just in terms of how many users it touched and how systemic it was, and then the nature of those attacks where this was playing out in real time. And, I just launched a podcast that's focused on quantum and getting up to speed with, from a first principles kind of learning about quantum and whether that's relevant to Bitcoin. It's going to be a 12-episode series where I kind of try to figure that out. But, if you're worried about that kind of attack, this actually is what a lot of people would say, right? You'd find a quantum computer that would come out, start breaking Bitcoin wallets, and there would be sort of the systemic panic as people tried to move and change their coins, to some safer form of custody. And so, I think it was almost a demonstration of what could happen. But yeah, this was a deep, deep technical failure in the wallet itself that was unfortunately in this case above every user. I mean, obviously some users we should be clear, did take advantage of the wallet, did make it, have a more advanced feature where you could add your own entropy to the seed phrase and choose not to generate your 12 to 24 words locally. But now I think we get a sense of the scale of folks who did not do that. And so while there were some users who were not affected, it does seem that a great many were. And it's also distinguished by just how far along we are in the adoption curve, how many people this touched. And again, I think how many people have heard the narrative now that Bitcoin self-custody is how you should store your Bitcoin. And I'm even hearing anecdotally, I heard a story this morning of somebody who went to look for their Coldcard and, this weekend, and they found it and it was okay, but then they had lost their password. And so they lost their Bitcoin anyway. It's and apparently that person lost 50 Bitcoin, right, in that incident. And Bitcoin's only going to get more scarce, right? We're not always going to be happy about the process by which it gets more scarce. But this is a tough one, right? As I said, there isn't really a good historical analog. There's nothing that was really built up on this level of adoption, hand-to-hand techniques, right? A lot of these users were won through podcasts, education, like one-on-one, family and friends. I don't think we'll see anything like it. I hope we don't see anything like it again. But we've certainly seen nothing like it before.
Yeah, and I often talk about this with friends in the space. The incentive for a hacker to perform an action like this will only increase as the price of Bitcoin goes up, because right now we're seeing, I believe the last count I saw is just shy of 1,500 Bitcoin has been stolen. When you talk about Mt. Gox, we were talking over 350,000 Bitcoin.
750.
There we go. It's like at a certain point, we will reach a price of Bitcoin where all a hacker needs to do is steal half a Bitcoin for their effort and energy to be worth it. And it will be on us to continue, us as in the Bitcoin community, because we are the early adopters. To believe that the masses will follow suit with everything that we do, I think is a bit naive. And we have proven that with the price action. The fact of the matter is, to me, the biggest signal of like, where does self-custody fit on the grand scheme and grand scale of where Bitcoin is, it's irrelevant. The price of Bitcoin doesn't reflect any issues whatsoever. And of course, we're seeing all of these memes that, candidly, if you thought that using Coldcard, like I did, using Coldcard was the safest, best option for you versus leaving your Bitcoin on Coinbase or some other exchange, if you left it on Coinbase, you were in a better position than quite a significant number of Coldcard holders. And my concern is that the lesson that we will take away from this is that while self-custody is an option for some, most people will err to avoid it outright because of this calamity, because you now need to be some sort of cypherpunk coder to understand what it is you're creating with a hardware wallet. And I bore witness to, I saw these stories break in real time when people trusted others like Celsius, like BlockFi, like Terra Luna, FTX, all in the span of 3 months. We watched all of these custodials not only lose customers' funds, but just completely go bankrupt through fraudulent actions. And yet that had the price actually reflect some sort of calamity. Here we are, in our opinions, I think we are both on the same page. This is a far worse thing to happen to Bitcoin. And the price, if you were just a chart reader, the price wouldn't reflect anything of the sort.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think because with custodians, the market and the mainstream, you look at the mainstream media coverage around this event, I think it's been pretty muted. There's a few reasons for that, right? There is no, again, and it's sad, right? And I think a reason that a lot of the people in the Bitcoin community are so angry and they're so upset, and I understand and sympathize a lot with this, but CoinKite, that company deserves to give a lot of transparency. They owe the public a lot of transparency into the process that created this. I think that to the extent that they'll have an opportunity to get back in the ecosystem, it's only through the extent that they will uphold that. So far, I mean, it seems like they're, at least from the latest post, open to being, to discussing what happened and to talking honestly about that. I know some people will always have, likely color the company's activities going forward. But look, I mean, I think that the people who made Coldcard were likely pretty uniquely aware of the challenges that they faced. As people who are creating tools for others to self-custody. Do I worry about self-custody? I never really considered myself someone who thought that the future of self-custody was inexorably intertwined with the future of Bitcoin. I think that obviously we don't want self-custody to go away, and self-custody I think will always be a really important keystone that you can self-custody Bitcoin. But I think it may be the case that we maybe overemphasized it. Maybe there were folks who weren't ready to make that jump that could have been, eased into something. And what do those relationships look like? What do those products look like? Maybe I don't even know at this point. I think there's, I'll give it a good example of a product that I in hindsight, have been thinking a lot about. People may remember Thea Wallet. It was a 202 multi-sig wallet where you used your phone and a friend's phone. And, that seemed pretty interesting and innovative in retrospect. And, maybe there's models like that proliferate. But look, I think we have to be honest that the way that the world safeguards financial assets is that it uses the traditional financial system to do that. And a lot of the reasons that we have large custodians and intermediaries is that the average person doesn't want the risk of maintaining and holding their own assets. And I've always thought that Michael Saylor obviously has an alternative view on this. I never really thought that he was able to express it in public. But I think if you look at what he's done as a builder, he believes that he is scaling access to Bitcoin through instruments like MSTR and STRC and other financial derivatives. And I think what I've always taken as an implicit byproduct of that argument is that he doesn't believe himself that self-custody will scale, and that he believes that we will have to rely on the existing financial system and the fact that people do want liability and they do want someone to blame when these things happen in order to scale up Bitcoin ownership. And so when he talks about the people who own, his stock, and again, I understand that there are a lot of people who don't like that he does this, but I felt like he was never really allowed to platform that argument directly. And one of the reasons that he wasn't allowed to make that argument to the Bitcoin community was that there was a certain zealotry on the self-custody side. There were people who simply discouraged that argument from really ever coming into the public. And I think that the folks who sort of didn't allow us to have that conversation, I think I would, if I were them, I'd be reflecting because, again, it was through their recommendations of best practices that some of these losses now did occur, however unfortunate. And so, yeah, I think we have to move towards having a more honest conversation about the trade-offs of different things. I don't think that for the average person, given that we're 17 years into Bitcoin and crypto experiment, I think you have to be honest about the state of custodians. The state of custodians in 2013, 2014 is, I had Jen McCaleb on my podcast, and he was talking recently about, he was the one who built Mt. Gox and sold it to Mark Karpellis. Like, he literally ran the Bitcoin market. Like he had all pricing information about the price of Bitcoin globally, like on his laptop. like there was a point in time where like he had all price information about buying and selling, right? And like obviously trusting a custodian when it's like a guy's laptop is like a very bad idea.
Oh, really?
We have to be honest about like that's not what Coinbase is today. That's not what Kraken is today. These are now large, in some cases, like they have 10,000 employees like across jurisdictions. They have cybersecurity teams, that spend, time and energy, like, trying to figure out how to best secure Bitcoin. And like, sure, there can be failures with that environment. I do think this is one of the category errors that I would invite people to think about, is that there was a preference for Coldcard because it was Bitcoin only, and there was a preference to recommend a product based on ideology that perhaps when actually fairly measured against its competitors, wasn't an accurate assessment. And what I mean
100%.
by that is, I think people were sort of choosing a product for ideology rather than usability. And, one of the aspects of that usability is that, yes, those companies were larger, their products were more expensive, their products had more packaging, and they had more, and look, there's a marketplace for folks who didn't want that. I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying that perhaps there was other things that company was missing, right, in providing that service at that cost. And perhaps we weren't honest about those trade-offs. And so, yeah, this is why I think this is going to be such a difficult conversation, because we're going to have to come back to first principles on self-custody and be honest about scaling ownership. And as I said, I keep coming back to it. It's like, how much am I comfortable recommending someone to hold on a single sig wallet now that I have seen just what's happened? I will be honest with you, I don't think that number is like over $20,000. I think I would, if a friend came to me and said, hey, Rizzo, should I put $25,000 on a hardware wallet? I would pause probably for a pretty significant amount of time as I answered that, if that was a meaningful amount to them, right? Obviously if it was Michael Saylor, I wouldn't, but I think we have to be honest that, there's probably a progression where, maybe people can graduate to self-custody. Maybe they should start through different, relationships with other providers. I mentioned a couple models that I thought were interesting, but yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, self-custody is a great product of Bitcoin, and it's something that we should always fight to preserve. But it is a freedom, and you don't always have to take advantage of that freedom in order for it to exist, right? There are many good reasons that you should consider other options, including maybe keeping some Bitcoin with custodians, provided that you trust them. I think this really. I think why people are so mad about the Coldcard incident is now they feel like their trust was broken, but that sort of implies that they had a trusted relationship with Coldcard to begin with. And I think that's odd, because some of the people who were most evangelical about Coldcard, what they liked about Coldcard is that you didn't have to trust it. And in fact, the product was designed itself so you didn't have to trust it, right? There were some users who were not affected. They were able to use these other things. So I think that there's a lot of emotions. I think we've got to get through this fog of emotions. I think maybe the next few weeks we're going to see a lot of people lashing out. Obviously, CoinKite, in some cases deservedly, has felt the edge of that sword. But is that the rational response? Should people feel entitled to that response? I think those are more difficult questions, right? Ultimately, we wanted these users to be responsible for their funds, and to an extent they were, right? And they were just, they felt the results of a consequence that I don't think we ever told them was possible, right? I don't think we allowed ourselves to admit that this was possible. So I think we have to start with admitting that and then see where we go.
Well, I think, one thing I want to just continue to remind everyone who is watching, listening, tuning in after the fact, this whole conversation about where to go next, what to do next if you are now concerned about how to approach self-custody, this is not a conversation you have to have alone. You can have a conversation with any of our experienced reps over at Bitcoin Well. Hop on over to bitcoinwell.com/infinite, set a time. This does not need to be you have to buy a Bitcoin through Bitcoin Well. If you just need someone to talk and figure out what to do next, that's what we are here to do. We are here to help, because this is all a bit unexpected, to say the least, as we're kind of diving into this. Like, many of us here at Bitcoin Well, we were using Coldcard or Coldcard products. We have been trying to stay ahead of it. We are publishing in real time, so be sure you are liking and subscribing the channel to stay up to date with our latest updates here. And I just want to, again, kind of double click on something that you said, because this is one of the most brilliant lines that you ever said when we worked together at Bitcoin Magazine, that it's stuck with me. But we as humans, we're not creative. We don't tend to recreate the wheel. We just kind of paint over it. And by and large, I would say 90% of Bitcoin products are just reimaginings of things that we already see exist in the traditional marketplace. A little sneak peek for everyone who is watching and listening to the podcast. Bitcoin Well, at the end of this month, we will be launching a beta of a Bitcoin IRA for our US customers. So feel free, if that is something that interests you, like reach out to us. But that's just rooted in the traditional financial system again. And it straddles this larger philosophical question of what is your priority when you are starting to be orange pilled or starting to invest more heavily in Bitcoin? Is it the concept of freedom money, or is it something that is a part of your portfolio strategy? And I think those philosophical questions that each person has to ask themselves will help to dictate what the custody solution that makes sense for you looks like. I will never advocate for someone leaving it with a trusted custodian, because like I watched it with my own eyes, and I'm still scarred. And mind you, like probably a little selfishly and arrogantly, because like the FTX debacle led to, in my opinion, the demise of one of the greatest Bitcoin podcasts ever in the history of Bitcoin. Yeah. So like I've seen it firsthand, how these things with trusted custodians, with like these charismatic leaders who say all of the right things, who are doing the right things, but then like why should we go back to trusting custodians when we have so many examples of that not working?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is, I mean, again, we just did everything we could to avoid that, and then we ended up back in the same place. And so I share a lot of the frustrations, right? I think like this is why I said, like, I think it's a gaping hole in the ideology, and because it basically is going to force us to go back to square one, and in terms of like thinking about what are we actually doing here, because of what you just said, right? It's we saw these sort of incidents with centralized custodians. We did everything humanly possible to get people into self-custody, you know, and to be honest, like the CoinKite team did, right? They galvanized podcasters, they created a product, they created a movement, they got all these people to self-custody their Bitcoin, and then still that blew up. And in some cases, you know, unlike the Celsius folks and unlike the Mt. Gox folks who, you know, at least were paid out something on their claims, so there might be no specific restitution in this instance. How I avoid it, I can tell you, is that I very rarely offer financial advice. I think that this is the real, if you want to be like my real, like, what am I struggling with as a result of this, is I think that we have wanted to pretend, and I'm going to use the word pretend to be a little controversial here, because I think we've wanted to pretend that holding Bitcoin in self-custody is not a financial product. I really think that we wanted Bitcoin to be a form of saving. We wanted it to be true that holding your own Bitcoin was risk-free. And I think that like going forward from this, we were just given a lot of evidence that suggests that belief and the want and the wish and the aspiration for that may be limited by certain things. In this case, the idea that self-custody requires currently for, you know, some hardware wallet manufacturer to produce a device that runs off some sort of software, and that in this case had a bug that neither the users could audit, neither the company was able to audit, neither were the influencers who promoted it able to audit, nor were the third-party auditors that they were able to audit. And so the level of breakdown in that instance, sure, you can say, okay, well, maybe let's make the jump to collaborative custody, right? So maybe you're talking about the CASAs and the BitKeys, and full disclosure, I use CASA, you know, for my custody services. And I think that's good. I think there are people for whom that, you know, could be the right solution. It's just so tough, because I think I go back to this first principle of like, we wanted Bitcoin ownership to be seen as being essentially risk-free. And I think that we might have convinced ourselves that that was true when it might have not been. And I think it's ideals can be inspirational, and then there's the reality. And I think that we've wanted to be different from the suit coiners and the shit coiners and the speculators. The Bitcoin movement has wanted to feel separate from that. We've never really wanted what we've been doing to feel like finance. But in reality, people were putting their time and money into this. And then the reality of the CoinCard loss is that they did everything that we told them to do, and they still lost everything. And that is, I don't know I think I can only, in trying to move forward for things, I simply try to just be honest in describing them. And so I've tried to be honest in the description of this is do we deserve that separation from the speculators, from the FTXs? You know, the FTX, you could say, oh, well, they deserved it. These were speculators gambling on random exotic crypto coins. You know, they used a custodian. They deserve it. Well, you know, in this case, these people, they really don't deserve it, and it's still happening to them. And that's worse, right? And I guess I get your frustration. It's like, do we go back to custodians? You know, maybe the reality is that in these cases, right, these people simply had too much of their asset in these types of arrangements, right? Maybe there was a range of options that would have been right for them. I just don't think that we had that conversation honestly, because I think there was a desire for Bitcoin to be seen as, even just like, think about the words, right? Like, I find it awkward, and I've been doing this for the last couple of days. It's like Bitcoin as a financial product. Like it sounds awkward. Like I don't like saying it. It sounds kind of gross. Like you're probably like, oh, that's weird. Why is he saying that? And I'm like, well, Bitcoin as a financial product. Like it is, it's money. It is a financial product. It has risk, right? It's sure, on some level, it's like holding a dollar bill. It's analogous to other financial products that have different risk factors. But that risk isn't zero. It's, you know, in some cases, like are we recommending a financial product for people when we recommend Bitcoin? And should we mentally have that mindset when we recommend Bitcoin as something for people? Again, I'm sort of finding myself in the unpopular position of like, I don't necessarily like any of these things, but I feel like you have to start by describing what's happening. And I think a lot of this negative emotion comes from the fact that one of our core tenets really, you know, is now sort of called into question. And, you know, I think the question that you're asking is an important second order question, which is, can we solve this with technology, right? Is the answer to just be better about self-custody, right? And have people, recommend that people have different types of relationships? Or is it to go back, to something else that looks more like a custodianship? It may be like, in the case of Michael Saylor, right? I think he's arguing pretty specifically for custodianship. And maybe the answer is a bit of a mix, right? I just think that it's going to be a painful process. I think the Bitcoin community is going to have to reckon with the fact that the FTX happened in our backyard. And it's going to require a lot of conversation and a lot of talk, and it's not going to be comfortable, and it shouldn't be comfortable because we owe it to the people who lost all that money to be honest about the situation that they were put in. And I think it's incumbent upon ourselves to aspire to not put them in that position again.
Yeah, I mean, I do get what you're saying, that a lot of these things, they happen on our watch, and they are, as much as we want to try to distance ourselves from the crypto casinos and just the crypto sphere in general as Bitcoiners, like they are synonymous with the issues that we're now really starting to see get exposed. And while you kind of allude to the idea or the mantra of not your keys, not your coin, I think the one that's been more exposed, and I will take it on the chin and I will take ownership and be guilty of the fact that I continuously would say, don't trust, verify. And the truth of the matter was, I trusted and I did not verify. And I feel terrible. I feel like sick to my stomach, some of the conversations I was having with friends and family over the weekend. And I've never been so happy that so many of my friends and family don't listen to me, and they do leave their Bitcoin on Coinbase, or they just like on whatever platform they are. I do still believe that for where I believe Bitcoin can go, the only logical thing to do is have it in self-custody. And the response, knee-jerk reaction right now from a lot of people is I'm out, either completely out of Bitcoin or I'm going to give it to a custodian.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, like this, the interesting thing about self-custody is it asks you like, what is the definition of that question? And that definition has shifted a little bit, right? I think, it is possible to custody other assets like in self-custody, right? If you get out in the crypto sphere, right, it is possible to have relationships with different financial assets that look like Bitcoin. And so, I think like self-custody, it's an important part. It is in a sense what makes Bitcoin unique, right? But then the idea is, does Bitcoin have to be fully defined by that, and do you have to use that Bitcoin in that way to be an end user, or is it only important that it's available and a freedom, right, for you to take advantage of? And I think the answer is it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag because. Again, I think like when we were saying that phrase that I kept going back to that's uncomfortable, it's like we wanted Bitcoin to not be a financial product. And I know this is true because I know what we meant by that was that we thought when we were recommending people put Bitcoin in self-custody, we thought that Bitcoin kept in self-custody would never lose value because Bitcoin would go up over time. So there was no way for the person to experience a financial loss. Therefore, the whole of that ideology and all those techniques, they were predicated on an idea that it was, I will say impossible, because I do think that's what we believed, for someone who self-custodied correctly to lose their funds. And I think that we have to be honest that that wasn't perhaps as true as we wanted it to be. And again, I don't feel like I have to know where we go forward from that. I just have to know that like, it's pretty clear we felt we were different. Like you're talking about FTX and other crypto coins, like the reason we thought Bitcoin was different or a certain amount of people did, is that this idea that like you couldn't experience financial loss by just holding Bitcoin. But these people did hold Bitcoin. They did self-custody, and they experienced a financial loss. And so their experience like invalidates that claim to some extent. Like it is true that like they could have rolled dice, or they could have used multiple hardware manufacturers. But I think on some level we have to be honest that we've wanted our behaviors to be different than these other groups. We've wanted to feel different than the speculators and the suits and the Wall Street culture, right? We've wanted that separation. But a lot of that separation was predicated on this idea that by listening to us, these people wouldn't experience financial loss. A lot of it. Like, I would say a lot of it was that. And so it's going to be tough to look ourselves in the mirror and say, like, hey, like, I encourage people to get into a relationship where they experience financial loss by advocating for Bitcoin kept in self-custody. I think that would be a very difficult sentence for a lot of people to say. But, in the spirit of Kanye West, it's, you got to say it out loud to see how it feels. I think that's what it is. That's what we did. We advocated for a certain set of things, and we told those people, you will not lose value if you hold Bitcoin over time in self-custody. And we're going to have hard conversations with people who did all that and still lost. And as I said, it's like my heart goes out to these people. My heart goes out to the people like yourself who are interfacing with them. My heart goes out to the companies who are working on solutions. I still try to have sympathy for CoinKite, because I know that the people there really never wanted something like this to happen. But I think in our quest to find somebody to blame for this, it's a natural human response. Is, who do you blame? Who do you blame? Who do you blame? I think we have to point the blame a little bit on a culture that wasn't really as honest with itself as it could have been. And maybe we do have to change because maybe the things that we did, as I said, and even myself, right? Like, I think a week ago, I would have told people that self-custody was the safest way to hold Bitcoin. I think now I would have to look at that person in the eye, and I'd have to have a conversation with them. And I don't know how I would react in that situation. I've yet to onboard somebody since last Thursday to the Bitcoin network, but I'll have to I'll have to report back when I have that conversation. I don't know, right? I think you have to, the way that I've survived in Bitcoin over the years is I think you have to look at situations and, you start by describing what happened. And I do think that a lot of people who followed the best practices and listened to the right people and they did the right things, they're not here anymore. They might not be coming back. And we might have been able to do more for them than we did. And that's going to hurt for a while. And I think it's, usually the infrastructure failure that's how you're in the bear market. And so if there was any denial before now, we're here, baby. Buckle up. You're here for 18 months or however long the bear markets are. But yeah, nobody wants financial loss. I think this was one of the things that, like the shitcoiners didn't want that. The Sucoiners didn't want that. We don't want that. Nobody wants that.
Everyone, by and large, like whether or not you want to admit it to yourself or openly, like we are a part of us is here for the number go up aspect of Bitcoin. We are not spending our time, money, effort, energy to acquire an asset because we think it's just going to stay stagnant for the next 5, 10, 20 lifetimes, if you will. Not even just years. So while I do agree that our eyes are open to the fact that just simple self-custody in a single sig solution is not going to be for everyone. And my brother, just before hopping on this, was texting me. He's just trying to build his own multi-sig with a few Blockstream Jade devices that he got his hands on. And he was texting me like, this is so complicated. Like, this is not as easy as I thought. And this is a kid who in high school, built his own gaming computer, was on the robotics team in high school. He can't figure it. I am not him. I work in this space. I call him for most of my help on the technical side of Bitcoin. And so we still have such a long way to go. But I was one of the people who was advocating Coldcard, unpaid. I was using Coldcard. I, knock on wood, thankfully, have not been affected by this. I have friends who were, and it sucks. But I will look anyone in the eyes with a straight face and tell them, if your priority is monetary freedom, the freedom and ability to take your money and spend it as you see, however you want, self-custody is the only option for that. There's no in between there. I do think that the risk of a custodian being able to thwart you or stop you from using your funds, no different than they can shut down your bank account in the United States where we live or in Canada where Bitcoin Well is headquartered. It's too great a risk to me to not want to at least try self-custody. I think your point is so valid, and it's something that I implemented a couple years ago, this idea that not all of my Bitcoin is in one wallet. It hasn't been for a while, out of user failure concern. I'm smart, but I'm not the smartest guy in the room. And when we talk about we joke on podcasts, not financial advice, but I always caveat it, up until the beginning of this year, I was living in my mom's basement.
Well, I think that the key part is that to what I was saying before, it's I think we tricked ourselves into thinking that we weren't giving financial advice because we wanted to feel like recommending Bitcoin and self-custody wasn't financial advice.
Right.
And I have to stick with this point. I know it's uncomfortable. I think if you had asked somebody 2 weeks ago, if you had gone on Bitcoin Twitter and you'd said, is recommending someone buy Bitcoin and hold it self-custody financial advice, you would overwhelmingly, the answer would be no.
Right. I understand what you're saying.
And I think that now if you were to ask me that question, seeing again, it's I read these things, it's guy for 10 years of his savings, it's oh my, how is it not? I mean, it's clearly at this point, it's, that person has no restitution. They can't get it back. And so, look, this is going to be a bad one. There's no, it's the definition of the Matrix scene where you're not like this, it's like if you were pulling out, it's it's the card game of Bitcoin, where they spin the dice and you're what would be the catastrophe? Maybe it was strategy going to zero or something else. You're all of those, maybe I could have lived, but this one, I mean, it's like I was texting a good friend, American Hodl, and he likes to say, he likes to give this. It's a parable. There was a maybe this is a good wind it down kind of thing. But the author of Infinite Jest, I can't remember his name offhand. But he gave this commencement speech at college, where he talks about the two fish, and the two fish are going along, and someone asked them, "How's the water today?" And the other fish goes, "Well, what's water?" And I think a lot of the bear market problems, these infrastructure failures, they're the what's water problems, and Coldcard was the water, like self custody was the water. They were the things that like weren't obvious, that you're looking around the room, you're like, well, which one's it going to be, whose game is up? Is it Sailor, is it Naka, is it which one of these institutions that looks like it's gonna tumble over? Like, is it an exchange, is it a crypto coin, like is it the Trump coin? And it was Coldcard, self custody, people who did everything right, and it's like, I mean it's just like, it's just like a one shot of like the worst. If you had asked me to pick anything else, I would have picked anything else. Like, this would have been the worst one, by far.
I agree. I mean, look, I've had clients try to, tell me that they think the price of Bitcoin is going down, and having now been through 2 bear markets, my first response is, well, something has to happen. Like, we didn't just get to 15K because the price of Bitcoin goes flat. We get to 15K in the fall of 22 because we have the Celsius debacle and Terra Luna and BlockFi and then FTX. And so my conversation, to your point, for the longest time has been, I think some of these Bitcoin treasury companies will start to blow up, and that will be the thing that drives Bitcoin's price down. There was not even the thought or the possibility of something like this happening, and rather foolishly, because like a conversation we've had internally is like, look, I'm not shy about saying I don't like Ledger because of them taking their code from open source to closed. And then here we are with a company that's code was open source that I did not myself verify. And I said, yeah, this is a reputable company. I trust them. And it is not, it wouldn't, you could have told me, think of the craziest thing to happen, and this would not have even made the top 100 for me. And I do understand what you're saying too, that the idea that by telling people to take Bitcoin into self-custody, this is a form of financial advice, whether we want to admit it or not. Even just the simple act of telling people to put money into Bitcoin in and of itself is a,
yeah, I think, but like there were so many mnemonic devices, like, it's like, well, no, you're not buying Bitcoin, you're exiting this, you know what I mean? There was so many,
right.
You're looking back at it, you're like, where does this failure come from? And it's like, well, like what I see, to be honest, is like there was a lot of deflection. And again, it's like, it's like, okay, well, was this stuff true? It's like, okay, like, you weren't buying Bitcoin. Oh, you're exiting Bitcoin. You're selling dollars, man. And it's like, okay, like, you started to see the creep of like, okay, like this is clearly worse. And I get it. We wanted, and I think there's a lot of other things I could point to you where you're going to be like, oh, okay, that's where that comes from. I'll give you a couple offhand. Why do we want Bitcoin to be designated as a currency and money why do we want the government to do that? Because
taxes.
Then it makes it not a financial product. Why do we want, so you can see like the culture has some of these demands, and it's like, why do we want governments to like hold it strategically as a reserve asset? Because that makes it not a regular financial product. We wanted to get Bitcoin into a category where owning it was seen as, I think, not just normal. I think there was a certain part of people who wanted owning Bitcoin to be normal. But that like you could extend it out. They wanted people to feel safe using Bitcoin. And we developed sort of a verbiage and like a way of talking about Bitcoin that was sort of designed to do that. Like, you're not taking a risk. The risk is the financial system. The risk is your exchange. Bitcoin and self-custody, that's not a risk. So we developed this whole sort of social system that I think now that I can see clearly what it is, was sort of designed to de-risk these activities. And then the honest question that I have is like now is like, okay, well, was that warranted? Like, should we in fact have had should we in fact have admitted to ourselves that that was a slippery slope? Because like, you know, maybe it started from a good place, but maybe it ended up with I'd hate to pull like a very specific example, you know, there being certain Instagram influencers who are like shilling cold cards and like pretending that they can do command line and pretending that their whole, you know, they can safeguard their life's wealth like on a single device that's made out of like, you know, 5 inches of plastic. Maybe that was too far. Maybe we just kind of didn't do that one right. Yeah, because you know, I think it's a wake up. Like, you know, it's like, why are the Bitcoin core developers so paranoid? Like, why don't they want to touch Bitcoin? Because like they've also struggled with this for years, right? Like a bug in Bitcoin is like catastrophic. Like nobody wants a bug. Like if there could be bugs in Bitcoin software, right? And so why have there been so many mental health like crises amongst Bitcoin developers, and why is it so hard to get people who want to do Bitcoin development? Well, because nobody wants the responsibility of changing the Bitcoin code, right? Like nobody wants the responsibility of changing Bitcoin's code. Nobody wants that. And why don't they want that? It's because they like, you know, like they have such a like, you know, they I think are aware of more than anyone else that like their specific actions can create that. And so, you know, I know there's a lot of people like upset at the Bitcoin developers currently about changes or lack of changes, but like, okay, well, like, you know, maybe we don't want to make like, this is why people don't want to make changes to software, because like no one really wants to be responsible for this kind of stuff. And yeah, I think that the anger in the community is unfortunate, because I think that it's pain, right? It's not, you know, I know there's people like looking around the company and like trying to kind of, you know, make bad accusations about certain figures. I think it comes from pain. I don't try to like, you know, be upset about it. I think it's unfortunate, because I think those people are also feeling that pain. The worst thing is pain, right? Like this. And I think in talking to some friends, it's like, this is kind of like a 9/11. I hate to use that example, but like, you know, in terms of like Bitcoin exceptionalism, you know, we thought like, okay, like we're this exceptional thing. And then you're like, it happens on your watch in your backyard. And it's like, there's a bit of a puncture here that I think is like a little bit more ideological, where it's like, oh man, like, yeah, maybe we were so different from these other folks. Like maybe we do have more in common with you know, your con base, as you would say them, right? Like I think at the end of the day, like, you know, they're trying to safeguard user assets too. And so I hope that maybe this kind of brings people back to the table, like more willing to discuss, like, or as a movement we go forward. Because I don't think the Bitcoin self-custody sort of maximalist group can really make the claim anymore that they have some empirically better results than some of the other parts of the community. And that's not, I'm trying to say anything negative here. I also wish that wasn't true. But I mean, we have to sit with the fact that, like, again, like a week ago, like nobody thought this was possible. Like just like nobody would have never entered anybody's head. And now people are like, well, you got to roll dice, or like even just like, you know, one of the things I watch a lot is like the change of language. And this has come up a couple times in our conversation, where people are like, oh, well, singles, that was always possible with single sig. I'm like, right. Well, I have never heard you describe a hardware wallet as a single sig wallet. Do not come at me with that colloquialism, pretending like you have in any setting ever referred to Bitcoin and self-custody as a single sig setup. That has never happened. I've never heard that.
Well, Rizzo, I will correct you on that one. If you ever took a just quick 15-minute introductory meeting with me for Bitcoin Well Infinite, I would describe it as single sig.
Other than the great advisor of Q, you know, but like, you know, it's slippery, right? Because you find these little things and you're like, you know, I get it, multi-sig, single sig, but like, yeah, nobody was saying that. And
no, not publicly.
Yeah. I mean, sure, the people who knew better, you know, maybe would hear it, but like, yeah, nobody. Well, this is a danger with singles. I mean, come on, no, it's like, it's like that's not how we got here. But yeah, I think there's going to be. I hope that this. I hope they're going to learn something from it. But I share your, just kind of confusion. Like I don't know where to go from this. I think it's going to require such an intense therapy, because I think. I don't want to give up self-custody. I would love to feel comfortable recommending self-custody. I would love to see that scale. I do think we have to have more of a conversation about what some of these other groups that are trying to achieve. I know the Bitcoin treasuries folks, when I tell them, I say, hey, like, it sounds like you're already making an argument that, the financial system could scale custody. They feel that they are making that argument. And I think that allowing them to make that argument, is probably healthy. I do think, obviously, like, trade-offs and risks, but I do think there has to be a bit more of a conversation that maybe there's a set of users for whom the current solutions are not adequate, and we need to be a little bit better about identifying those people and getting them into situations where they can become more comfortable. And I think what you're doing with the advising, is great. I think, it's so hard for the average person to access expertise in this area. And I think, being in Bitcoin Twitter, we sort of forget that. It's as much as we don't want to rely on it, I think it's something that we have to do. And so I don't have any good answers. I don't know if you should buy a bag of seed words sticks, or you should buy some weighted dice, or I haven't made any critical changes to my setup because I use assisted self-custody. And at the end of the day, I know that I'm honest with myself, that if I can't call somebody on the phone freaking out, I'm gonna like
Totally.
mentally I can't handle that. And so there's got to be a place for those kind of people in this Bitcoin world, or this cypherpunk world.
Again, I will shamelessly continue to bring this up, but not only are we at Bitcoin Well very focused right now on ensuring that everyone feels comfortable and safe with their self-custody setup, because we at Bitcoin Well, we will always be freedom maximalists, and more specifically self-custody maximalists. We want to help people make sure that they feel safe. And if it just is as simple as, look, Therapist Q is in session all week, all weekend. All I've been doing is having therapy sessions with clients. And let me tell you, it's painful, but again, this is not a journey that we have to go on it alone. As much as we want to cast, I think, Bitcoin Twitter as this cesspool of negativity, and it exists. I see the finger pointing. I see the blame game.
Right now, it's pretty bad. Yeah,
it's disgusting, and I won't be a part of it. I won't stand for it. Like, people who try to point the finger at me that I did something wrong, I will look you dead in the eyes and say, I'm absolutely wrong to have ever mentioned recommending Coldcard to anyone. But if you had a conversation with me in the last 2 years, you would also know that I actually haven't for 2 straight years, and I've explained that I think it's too overly technical and complex, and there are simpler wallets that are now proving that they are more secure, and the simplicity is a feature, not a bug. But I will continue to reiterate that you are not in this journey alone. Go to bitcoinwell.com/infinite, set a time with one of our advisors, and we can just talk through whatever you need to talk through, because this should not be a moment where we abandon ship. This is not something that, in my opinion, is the end of Bitcoin. I see the 9/11 analogy thrown out a lot. And yes, the brown guy is going to talk about the 9/11 of Bitcoin very astutely. But New York rebuilt. The Yankees went on to win the World Series that year. Bitcoin is not dead. I have lived through some of these things myself and seen it with my own eyes. This, to me, is one
Don't
of the
remind me about
scariest.
the Yankees winning that year. It's still painful.
I mean, dude, you're talking to a Bo Sox fan, so I'm with you, man.
Oh, really? Okay, man, it's been great, huh? 20, we're on a roll.
I mean, hey, trading Jaylen Brown was the best thing to happen in the Red Sox. But I go back again, just the point being that this is an opportunity for the Bitcoin community to come together. For every single person that wants to point the finger at a podcaster and say they did this wrong, they did that wrong, I will bet Bitcoin that same podcaster is putting in the effort to help as many people as they can in real time while you're sitting there pointing the fingers. Either help or just sit down for a moment. Like we as a community need to come together and try to fix this together, make sure everyone is safe, and then figure out what the next iteration of products look like. That is a natural progression of technology. And for people who are involved in a space that is the quote unquote future of money, the digitization of money and gold, we seem to like kind of lizard brain this a little too much. But I'm getting, my anger and frustration is coming out, and it is not directed at any one individual person or group. This is more of a rallying cry to Bitcoiners, like help each other. Like this is not a time to drag one another down.
Yeah,
This
I
is
think
not-
immediately, like if you have friends and family who are connected, like you want to help them get safe. But otherwise, I think it's okay to it's okay to sit down and feel bad about this one. I think this is
100%.
You know, this is like the Spurs losing from being up 30 points. You know, like you know, this is a hard L. You know, I don't think.
No, this is the U.S. losing to Belgium on home soil.
Yeah, that one was pretty. Though we really got clobbered on that one. Yeah,
But like, this is a straight punch in the chin, in the gut, and
I don't think
balls.
I've seen like another sports team dominate. I like didn't know it was possible for a soccer team to dominate another soccer team like that. I remember watching this and I was like,
next time we're at a conference together during soccer season, I will, because at the conference this last year in Vegas, I literally stepped away to watch my Arsenal.
Okay, yeah.
Win versus.
Because like, you know, usually soccer is like a bit of a languid game. You know, people are passing it back and forth. But yeah, the Belgians really just like beat the. I didn't know that soccer achieved that. Like you could be pwned that much like in a single like 90-minute game, where it was like they were just swarming everybody. And, you know, I was like, okay, okay. I was wrong about that. Yeah, that's you can really get up in there and start hammering away, like you know, if you really want. Yeah, man. I mean, I appreciate you having me on for the tough convo. I mean, you know, I wish I had something better to say to folks, right? All I can say really is I think, you know, Bitcoin's going to survive. I've always said, like, Bitcoin survives in spite of us. That's always something that stuck with me. I've seen a lot of people try to change and warp Bitcoin to their own ends over the years, and Bitcoin resists that. And it's both good and bad. And, you know, I think, you know, we're going to learn some tough lessons. We're going to have to move forward. And I think some people are going to come up with some great ideas to help us move forward. But as I said, I think right now, I think it's okay to feel bad about this one. I think there's, especially when we were really convinced about a lot of these things. I think that we were doing them for the right reasons. That I think we can be sure. But I think we have to look at the results now, and the results are a little bit different than we wanted.
Yeah, Pete, first and foremost, thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today. It's an absolute pleasure. If you are not following Pete Rizzo, it's Pete_Rizzo_ on Twitter, correct?
That's correct, sir. The Bitcoin historian, otherwise otherwise known. But yeah, you can go over there. You can go to YouTube /@Bitcoin history. So see you there. Appreciate the time, sir.
Thank you. And, you know, my final thoughts and words on this, you know, as we wrapped up talking about the World Cup in soccer, I think it's very fitting that, you know, if you haven't watched Ted Lasso, like, spoilers, I'm sorry, it's been out for enough years, but at the end of Ted Lasso, like, they did everything right and they still finished second. Mm-hmm. And it's just a gentle reminder that, like, just keep doing all the right things. It doesn't always form the results you want that first time or that second time, but that doesn't mean you stop or deviate from doing the right thing. So be kind to your fellow Bitcoiners, continue to lend a helping hand. We get through this together, not by pointing fingers and not by dividing each other, by working together to find a better solution to move forward. Thank you all. And if you are not, please like and subscribe to the channel down below. We will be back next week with another episode. And please, so I can keep my job, go to bitcoinwell.com/infinite. Thank you again.